We'll tell you any shit you want to hear.
Multi-armed deities.
Twisted and gyrated in provocative and sensual fashion.
There is no future.
So why not just burn the whole fucking thing down?
People are so evil.
I wish I could find a Hitler of today and go kill him.
What a time to be alive.
Welcome to the Nostalgia Trap AM/FM. This podcast is produced by robot historians in the near future, working in an abandoned mine shaft deep beneath the surface of a destroyed planet. Through space and time, the robots collect recordings of various humans attempting to make sense of a rapidly collapsing political and social situation, as the human disease unleashed its final spasms of cruelty and death. Brought to you by Flaming Hot Cheetos.
It's not easy being cheesy.
Please enjoy.
Suck a hippo's cock. Suck a honey badger's try to...
I remember sitting with you, Justin, like years ago in the Village and like hearing this story about Allen Ginsberg and Bob Dylan hanging out during the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they were hanging out at like Holiday Cocktail Lounge. And they were thinking like, at any moment, like we're about to be obliterated by a nuclear bomb, and that's the end of our lives. You know, I have this clip of J. Robert Oppenheimer. He's the inventor of the atomic bomb, or at least one of the scientists involved in the invention of the atomic bomb. And this clip is kind of a famous one of him describing what it was like to watch the first mushroom cloud and realize that they had succeeded in creating something rather demonic. And this clip kind of, you know, is him describing that eerie feeling. And what I find uncanny about this clip when I listen to it is it also describes what it felt like to watch Donald Trump be elected. And I wonder if that resonates with you. Because I was at a live event in Brooklyn, actually for Chapo Trap House. I think I've mentioned this on the show before. And it was kind of, you know, it was surreal and you know, it was chilling actually to watch a group of young people who I think were pretty, you know, pretty smug, and I would include myself in that, about anticipating a Hillary Clinton victory and the coronation of this awful neoliberal dynasty. But to watch that switch, to watch the kind of air go out of the room and the energy shift was amazing. And I think this clip of Oppenheimer describing the atomic bomb actually captures what it felt like in that room, to witness a group of young people kind of realizing together that their lives were going to be different than what they thought they were going to be, and specifically that they were going to be living through a very, very different historical era than they had anticipated.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Nuclear bombs have entered the territory again all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, it's some nice ripe headlines from Putin and from Trump saying the nuclear arms race is on, but it's all good. Don't worry about it.
It's all good. Wait, but how can that be, though? Like, I mean, all right. First of all, it's weird to think that the nuclear arms race just has started again, right?
Totally. Well,
like that periodization is weird to think that, oh my God, like all of a sudden we could be in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that you and I have both had a fatalism about the fact that like this bomb has been kind of this thing out there in the same way that like it hangs over the 1950s and 60s. It hangs over our age too. It's just not talked about.
Well, I think there's, you know, three things to think about. Number one, it's been associated with rogue states. So like the narrative has coalesced around preventing Iran from getting the bomb, or oops, North Korea let off another one. You know,
yes.
It's all about rogue state containment. The other thing that's weird is the Nobel Peace Prize, I thought, was half awarded to Obama because, one speech he gave once when he was first elected or beforehand saying that he planned to cut the number of bombs that were out there or do something. And he ends up in the last 3 or 4 years just modernizing the arsenal. He actually gives over billions and billions and billions of contracts to modernize the U.S. nuclear arsenal. So then that becomes a kind of weird contradiction of the last 8 years, which is one of things are getting better, and they're happening a lot slower than we otherwise planned. And the 9/11, like there's going to be a random WMD attack that set off the Fox show 24, where we're going to have to torture 3,000 people just to find that nuke. That narrative kind of fell off the table with Obama's election, and we no longer had like that weird scare narrative, which was everywhere between like 2001 and 2008, everywhere. So those are weird places the bomb went, but now I feel like the bomb is back, like the original bomb, the Ginsburg bomb, the Dylan bomb. The bomb is back.
Man, how exciting. What a time to be alive.
Hillary and Obama want to make you poor and pathetic. We have all their white papers. They hate you. They hate prosperity. They hate God. They hate children. And goddamn them to hell.
And you want to be my latex salesman.
When you think about Obama winning the Nobel Prize, it makes me think of Kissinger winning the Nobel Peace Prize too. Basically in the same year that he was carpet bombing Cambodia. And when you think about that, I mean, to me, it's like Kissinger winning the Nobel Prize is like when Crash won the Best Picture for the Academy Awards. Like you can no longer see these awards as really representing anything legitimate. They're like some expression of something that we don't know about, but they're certainly not representative of what the award is actually meant to be.
At a certain point, the awards became neoliberal.
Right. Both the Academy Awards and the and the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, all institutions at a certain point realized that it wasn't just about award giving in sort of like an unconscious romantic sense, that there was a politics to the whole thing that needed to be coextensive with the way people were moving politically.
Well, I don't even know what that means, but like what I know is that what I think is that with the nuclear bomb, what we're getting at, you and I, is this feeling that there's this freaking out about Trump, and like I'm freaked about Trump too. Like when I think I've mentioned on the show a couple times that when Trump was elected and it kind of like became clear that he was like the New York Times got it all wrong and that this guy is going to be our president. I felt sick, and I felt this kind of nuclear apocalypticism. But at the same time, there's like this other trigger in my head. And I know you've got it too. That's like, wait a second. Like this danger has been here for a long time. And in fact, the danger that we're fearing about Trump kind of bringing a new nuclear arms race, kind of belies the fact that under Obama, under Clinton, all of it's been a nightmare. Right?
It has been. Well, and also one thing we have heard in many election cycles is whose fingers on the nuke, and that's related. Whose fingers on the button, which is related to the 3 a.m. call.
Yes,
so
and the football. Who has control of the football?
That's right.
Yeah.
And Gary Willis has a book, Bomb Power, in which he said that the entire country and our conception of politics, and also the way democracy and like the so-called republic works, changed the minute you had a single executive in charge of what he called bomb power. So like this idea that you can now control the existential fate of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people with the switch of a finger, changes the way everything gets done. And one of his theses is it consolidates and solidifies almost for eternity an imperial state. Like once you get that bomb power, you can't change that form of government.
It's like it is like I don't know. I frequently tell my students that when the nuclear bomb was invented, it changed the script. It changed the script of whatever the world narrative was in a really, really powerful way. And it's like it became like this Lord of the Rings thing. And I hate these kind of like comparing to like Game of Thrones or whatever. But like it became like the number one power in the world, the United States, through the process of World War II. And I mean, we come back to World War II again and again and again. That like World War II is this like kind of like For me, it's best understood as some sort of like mass initiation ritual in which the United States became crowned the unparalleled military and economic leader and political leader of the world, but did so with the nuclear bomb being like a key element in that whole process, right? And the nuclear bomb being like the power to destroy worlds and obliterate cities silently with just kind of like this white light, and also a mushroom cloud, which for those listeners that are into the psychedelic elements of this.
I have had 7 balls of light come off of a UFO, lead me onto their ship.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
Explain to me telepathically that we are all one and there is no such thing as death.
Kind of like the idea that like the mushroom is there as this fact, right? That humans have to come to terms with in some way. And so, we've got this atomic bomb, and it really becomes not only, and I think a lot of people think of it as a metaphor in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's like, these are real weapons.
They're real weapons, and what I think those commercials get right, which were lobbed at every politician, like whose finger's on the button. The thing that I think it gets right is actually the enemy may not be Iran, the enemy may not be North Korea. The problem is that one of us has a finger on the bomb.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's actually going to keep you up at night, is that you believe the wrong person has their finger on the button. But one thing we don't talk about, because the narrative is so realistic that it's insane, if that makes sense, is that no human being should have that power. You know what I mean? Like that it's not that Trump is quote unquote unfit, language of eugenics, unfit,
right?
For real,
right.
Is unfit to press the button or to have the quote unquote codes, which is thrown around as a scare tactic. Really, Hillary Clinton is not.
No one should
fit.
have the codes. Right.
Barack Obama was not fit. George Bush was not. None of them going back.
Yeah.
Were fit. The bomb isn't something that can be fit, and that's what I think of as like the sort of unparalleled insanity of the bomb, is that everyone's trying to have like a super reasonable election or conversation about something that is way beyond
Wholly
a torture device. It's a genocidal technology. And it's kind of like, well, so their fingers on the button, the right person's fingers on the button. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah.
That we're going to have a rational, cool president who's like Harvard educated and super elite. He's going to be one to commit genocide? No. Yeah, he has to be the one, because we don't want like the trashy Twitter president to be the one that commits genocide, which kind of makes me think, wait a minute, you're unwilling to accept the genocide committed by the trash president.
Yes.
But you are willing to willing to tolerate the genocide committed by like the cool Harvard educated president. There's something messed up about that logic.
I think we need to create a hashtag called woke genocide, which is essentially the idea of like, a genocide that's carried out in the most progressive way imaginable.
Oh, good point.
Right?
Yeah, very good
It's
point.
like the cast of Girls is there.
I think that there is something about the struggle of finding yourself, the struggle of feeling like you have a place in the world, feeling connected, that's really universal. And whether you're working at a coffee shop or as lucky as I am to sort of do this job that I love.
I feel like woke genocide is kind of the campaign that Hillary Clinton ran in a lot of ways. I mean, the way that she foreclosed on any possibilities of change, it's just kind of incredible how they thought they could win the election, and how even I thought they could win the election. The nuclear bomb. You know what? You know that you and I are like really attracted to like. Well, I know that I am. I don't know how attracted you are now to these like mega narratives. The idea of like, I don't know, seeing the kind of structures of narrative and the structures of story played out in like real histories, and the nuclear bomb is like, reminds me of like that famous quote from Alfred Hitchcock where he basically says that like if there's a gun or a bomb introduced in a story, like it's gonna go off at some point. That's the whole point of it, And so like when the nuclear bomb being invented in the 1940s makes me think that we're still, for me, in a lot of ways, I think of us as like in one story, and that story is between the invention of this bomb and its inevitable unleashing. So in some ways, I fall into the same scare tactics or fears that liberals are expressing right now about Trump. Like, oh my God, This could actually happen.
Well, two submerged narratives about the bomb, and you should check me out on this. And if anyone's listening to this, you should Google this and make sure it is horseshit. The one I'll say first is in the last few Pentagon threat reports. I know there was one during the Bush administration. I want to say 2003. There might have been a follow-up one where the Pentagon talks about the climate change as a threat assessment, and that one of their contingency plans is that as climate migration becomes haywire, becomes crazy, and as borders become heavily militarized and policed because so many people are streaming north to south every which direction to kind of get to zones that have food and shelter and water and that are away from disaster zones, that as this happens, it predicts that certain nations will utilize nuclear weapons to fortify their borders and to act as a deterrent against huge swarms of people that are trying to migrate to get out of disaster zones. So someone should Google that to make sure that they actually say the word nuke, because what I do know is that they anticipate militarized borders in that way to stop the migrants and to control population movement in the coming decades. But the other thing that's submerged that I think is worth thinking about is how big the anti-nuke movement was in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and the 1980s, and how quickly it collapsed when the Soviet Union collapsed.
That's right.
And how many books by people like E.P. Thompson are about the anti-nuke movement, and how many leftist intellectuals, academics, and people were part of a movement to end nuclear weapons, concerts, benefits, etc.
And the group SANE, SANE, was the group that really was the entryway for millions of young people in the New Left. It's where if you read Todd Gitlin's book on the 60s, he talks about SANE as where he first got into left politics, and then that SANE led into the civil rights movement, led into the anti-war movement and everything else.
But that's not a history that is quite visible. It's not taught. And I feel like if things keep going towards, we're going to out-nuke everyone else all of a sudden, if the so-called arms race starts again, or even this narrative actually has some material consequences in the next administration, I think we're going to have to go back to some of those out-of-print books and magazines and ticket stubs and not reproduce those kinds of social movements, but to think about a couple generations of people who did think about this for a decade or two beyond Dylan and Ginsburg in the bar, and to also kind of re-inhabit that kind of existential or post-existential space where the world could end any time. And in other words, we're not the first generation to deal with this, but for me in my adult life, this is the first time I've had to seriously contemplate a possibly drastic change in the narrative, where it's not just the random nuke that's going to get let off in Times Square. It's a sustained barrage of nukes that are being used to problem solve on different continents, not the product of terrorism, but actually is part of the nation state logic of managing populations and managing resources.
God, you and I talked about this. I remember now during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, the idea that there used to be this notion that we had control over the nuclear arsenals. We knew which countries had them. There's kind of the feeling now, especially when you think about how terrorist networks and other networks are existing completely on the internet and spreading in a way that's not really traceable, despite the fact that the United States, has created this massive security apparatus to go after them. The idea is that the story is not controllable, and that the nuclear arsenal is not controllable, and the capability to deliver a nuclear weapon could be in anybody's hands right now.
Reminds me of that scene in Children of Men where the newspapers are on the wall. And it seems like most of the bombs are going off in Central Asia.
Yeah.
And I think that's not prophetic, but it's strategically sound. Because when I hear Trump and Putin dally around the fact that, they might be building weapons, but they're also best buddies.
Yeah.
I kind of think, those weapons in Moscow aren't aimed, at Iowa. And I'm beginning to think that the weapons in Kansas aren't aimed at St. Petersburg. I'm beginning to think that the U.S.-Russian alliance is about the control of Asia in the 21st century. And I'm kind of interested in triangulating the Russian-U.S. alliance that maybe is happening here with the bellicose remarks against China. And
wait a second, U.S.-Russian alliance? I thought Russia just stole our election, dude. Don't you know that? Isn't that what just happened?
I think that's for another show.
Okay, wait.
But I think that if we just kind of take it as, there
why
is
do you say that though? What is the Russia-U.S. alliance about to you?
Asia. So much of the resources, the population, and so much of the future is in Asia. Obama's pivot to China looks strategic still. If instead of Obama going around the Caucasus and Obama going around the Middle East and trying to contain China through the South China Sea and through the Philippines and through Japan, why not you just try to contain China through the Caucasus, through the Middle East, and through Russia? Meaning, China's surrounded by a potential U.S. ally. And if you look at Russia, a bad economy, they want those sanctions lifted, but they're also looking down to the southeast a little bit. And Russia and China have a historically contradictory relationship like all nations do.
Right.
And, there's something possibly to be gained from thinking about a 21st century in which you have dwindling resources, climate change. You're going to have huge migrations north, both to the North Pole and the South Pole, as the equator heats up, and as the ripple of instability that comes out of droughts and everything else ripples across the Middle East and ripples through Central Asia. Where are you going to need population management? You're going to need to control the migrations to the north. Well, Canada is already a U.S. ally. Who's the only other major world player that controls access to the north? Russia. So who do you want on your side for the future?
Yeah.
And who has a very limited population for how large that country is?
That's right.
Russia is an enormous country, and as the tundra melts, they're going to have a lot of land that's not going to be so cold anymore.
Right. Siberia.
And what do you have when you look at
Siberian?
China?
Hashtag Siberian futures.
Right.
Right.
What happens when you look at China? You have a country that's self-contained, has an enormous population, and is trying to grow into the water, when the most logical place for the Chinese to grow is north. But what's there? And so I think that if you want to control Asia, which is the 21st century, how many antagonists do you need in the picture?
Yeah. And how many nuclear bombs do you need?
In retrospect, it almost seems inevitable that human beings would destroy themselves and extinguish all sentient life on the planet in a final orgasm of blood and fire. Please like and share the show on Facebook and Twitter.